Welcome to the DSO Hygienist Podcast, where we deep dive into the world of DSO hygiene. I'm your host, Christine Deal. I'm a practicing clinical hygienist with over 30 years of experience. 7 years ago, my private practice was bought by a DSO. I am an advocate for hygienists working in the DSO space. Discover how DSO hygienists can advance their careers and make a meaningful impact in the field. From career growth opportunities to in-depth discussions on the challenges and triumphs of the DSO hygienist, in this podcast, we will provide exclusive insights, expert interviews, and real stories from passionate hygienists who are making a difference. You won't want to miss a single episode. Even if you aren't currently in the DSO world, you will benefit from a wide range of topics. Subscribe now to the DSO Hygienist Podcast and be part of the conversation. Your journey to happiness and success begins here. On this episode, we will be discussing transitioning from a private practice to a DSO. We have a very special guest, Dr. Doug Palmer. Dr. Palmer was born in Chicago and moved to Southern California at the age of 4. He attended California State College, now the University at Fullerton, on a full academic scholarship. After 3 years, he was admitted to Northwestern University School of Dentistry. He served in the United States Air Force as a dentist. He spent those years in Texas, Sheppard, and Kelly Air Force bases. He originally settled in Lake Bluff, Illinois, with a private practice in Lake Forest. He missed working with other dentists, so he joined a group practice in Wisconsin. But he decided to go back out on his own and purchased a successful private practice in Montgomery, Illinois. He finally found his niche. In 2000, he moved the practice to a new building that he built in Oswego, Illinois. He served his patients and staff there until 2020. After 45 plus years of practice, he retired and moved south to Georgia to be with his family and the warmer weather. He's a member of the American Dental Association, the Wisconsin Dental Association, the Illinois Dental Association, and the Academy of General Dentistry. He served on various committees in those associations. He is very committed to continuing education and earned a fellowship from the Academy of General Dentists. Welcome, Dr. Palmer.
Hi, thanks, Christine. I enjoyed being with you again.
I'm just going to get right into the questions because I know everybody wants to know these things. My first question for you is, why did you decide to sell your private practice to a DSO?
Well, for me, it was the only way to work the transition from private practice into retirement. I tried really hard to find a dentist that would be able to take over my practice and allow me to work, and they would gradually fill in. But it just didn't really work out for me. So when I really made the decision that I was going to make the transition from private practice to retirement, I realized that I didn't want to just walk away from the practice. I really wanted to just have the opportunity to have the freedom to walk in and out without the business control that I used to have. Mm-hmm. The DSO gave me the opportunity to sell the practice and still continue working so that I could phase out to retirement in my own time.
So that was a big benefit for you with working with the DSO?
It was the big benefit because the practice, was a very large practice for a single practitioner. And you needed somebody that had the financial strength to buy the practice without necessarily taking over the practice financially. So it was the only way I could transition out on my terms as opposed to on somebody else's terms.
Now, were there challenges or concerns you faced when selling your practice?
Certainly by the time I made the decision that I was going to sell my practice, my biggest concern, and hopefully the concern for most dentists who are looking to sell a practice, is the quality of the people taking over the practice. I mean, I cared a great deal about not just my patients, but my staff was very, very important to me. We had a great staff. We worked together for many, many years, and I felt they were more my family than my employees. And I felt that I needed something that would recognize that kind of relationship and support the staff and the patients the way I had for the last 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, I totally understand that. Were there any unexpected or positive outcomes that resulted from your partnership with the DSO?
Well, just going backtrack, when you're looking to buy a DSO or go into a DSO, sell your practice, I think it's really, really important to understand the character of the people who own the DSO or run the DSO. There were so many people that I talked to that were really only interested in the financial bottom line. They just talked about, well, how much money am I going to make and blah, blah, blah. And it just didn't really fulfill my goals. So once we had made that decision, to be honest with you, the transition into the DSO, I think what my biggest surprise was how easy it was. I mean, the people that I sold to pretty much just gave me complete control over the practice and allowed me to run the practice the same way I always had. So that the years in my transition while I was there was basically not that much different. I mean, there were some real positives because they were able to buy supplies at a much, much lower rate than we were able to do. So the cost of the business actually went down. But, I think, like I said, I think my biggest surprise was how well the transition went. It just was very smooth.
Now, when you did the transition, how did that impact your day-to-day responsibilities and your autonomy, like you were talking about?
Well, to be honest with you, because I'm so hands-on, it probably didn't do a lot as far as because they said you can have as much or as little input as you want. So if I wanted just to be an employee and walk in and walk out and not be connected with the day-to-day running of the practice, then they would be happy to allow me to do that. But they said if you want hands-on and you want to be involved, then you can do kind of what you want. So it was a transition that allowed me to be involved as much as I want and as little as I want. So for my transition, it probably didn't greatly affect my day-to-day, except I had the opportunities to maybe take more time off if I wanted to take more time off and not have maybe the worry or the responsibility of whether the money was going to be coming in. Because when you go to a DSO, although you still have some degree of money as a dentist, you get some degree of a commission. We also had a base salary. So, it was a little bit of a different environment financially.
Sure, sure. I understand that. But now I guess I should confess now, Dr. Palmer and I have worked together and we actually went through this transition together. And I have to say, the one thing I noticed, or at least I kind of picked up on, I think you seemed a lot happier. At the end when you didn't have to do the payroll and, have all those other responsibilities on the back end. I thought it really, I don't know. I just thought it was just a happier environment, I thought.
There's no question. I think, it may be a burden of I don't know, of something. When you own the practice, you have that burden of that practice succeeding and making payroll and doing all of that. But when that is lifted off, you don't really expect it to be that much of a weight off your shoulders, but it really is. I mean, all of a sudden, you're just you can relax, you can go in and it's a slightly different environment. And I think the fact that, I was getting closer to retirement, although to be honest with you, I probably would still be working if it wasn't for COVID, but that's another story. I always loved what I was doing, and it allowed me to enjoy the dentistry more without the hassles of the practice itself.
I could definitely see that. How did the transition affect your relationships with your staff and your patients?
I don't think it affected my patients too much at all. My staff was extremely supportive, and you guys just took care of the patients, just the way you always would. I think there were certainly some concerns with my staff and having somebody else own the practice and having somebody come in and well, you have to do this and you have to do that. There was, as any organization, they're going to have their own little ideas on what to do. And we had, monthly meetings that they had to go to and quarterly, but I don't know what to call them. Like, it was like support groups where you would get together and they would have everybody together. And it was a little bit different than what we would do as an office. but it worked out pretty well, all in all. I think, the fact, probably the biggest hassle that my staff had was they immediately came in and changed our network for our software that was running the practice. And that was a major headache. And that did not enhance the transition very well and put everybody a little bit on edge. But, I had a great staff and they all worked through it, and they only hated me for a while.
Well, yeah, I feel a little responsible for letting the cat out of the bag on that one. Sorry. But, I think that's one thing maybe other dentists could learn. We rallied for you, and we realized you were always so great to us that, you needed to retire. I mean, let's face it, we would have loved to have you forever, but it was time for you to retire. And I'm
very old.
I think if we had maybe been a little more prepared, because, DSO has a very bad connotation, let's just face it, in our industry. And I think if we would have been, I don't know, maybe it would have been worse if you would have told us outright. But I do think that had you told us, we would have understood. We may have been a little more resistant, but we would have understood. I don't know if I don't think that affected our relationship. I don't know if it affected other staff relationship, but because you'd always been so honest with us, I think that just kind of threw us off a little bit with that news.
Yeah, I guess, that's an interesting aspect of transitions. There's always that, well, do you keep it a secret or do you not? You're so concerned about patients hearing that you're retiring that's going to affect the practice and people are going to leave. And so I guess maybe that might be a reason why I tried to keep that mostly, closer to the vest as far as telling everybody, because you're always concerned about that, the effect it will have maybe on the success of the practice for the new people that are coming in.
Sure.
And I guess I should have trusted my staff a little better back in those days. So, because I always had in the past, so I don't know why I got hung up on it at that point, but you all did well.
Yes. And actually, I felt the transition was really wonderful. I didn't have any issue with it. Now, after you've decided the decision-making process within the office, did you still had some control over that? Or did you, I guess, you still had a lot of pull still, correct?
Well, there's definitely with the Decision One dental system, they have it split so that the dentist pretty much runs the professional side of the practice. They make the decisions on what you're going to do with the patients, how you're going to treat the staff, what you're going to buy, as far as, supplies and material. You just don't decide where you're going to buy the supplies and material. They decide where the materials are going to be bought and what kind of things. So when it comes down to the actual, professional aspect of the practice, I had complete control. I mean, I could do and say whatever I wanted regarding that. But when it came to running the practice and buying supplies and that sort of thing, I had input, but it was vetoed if they wanted to. They had the control on that side.
Now, were there changes to patient care or treatment options during the transition, did you feel?
I felt the practice ran almost exactly the way it did before as far as the way our patients were treated. I thought they were given every option they wanted to have. They had all the same care by whether it was owned by DSO or whether it was owned by me. There were no restrictions and no requirements at all. They just said, do your best. And that was with this DSO, their plan is always do the best you can for your patients at all times. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of their goal as far as professional. And it always worked well. It always worked well.
Sure. How did the DSO support the growth and development of the practice as you were transitioning?
Well, I think they do a couple things for trying to develop the growth. They had continuing education courses that they would bring people to. They obviously had different ways for the staff to grow within those aspects as well. As far as, they gave ideas as far as marketing, but I think, as far as marketing the practice out, they didn't do a lot. They felt that, it was still being run more as an individual practice. So they don't have this DSO, especially, it's not like a Aspen Dental or something that has a national name.
Mm-hmm.
They run each practice as its private owned practice and has to stand on its own. And that's one of the aspects that the way they ran that. They'd support you and kind of give you a better analysis, let's say, than a lot of practices will have. So they're behind you, giving you information on how your practice is doing, how you're making money, if you're losing money, you're doing better, and try to give you some suggestions as a dentist, what you might do to improve things. But the reality is, it was still on your back to try to make that practice work well. And other than finding better ways to buy materials and get support that way, I don't think there was a lot of marketing support, in my opinion.
Sure. Now, did you look at other DSOs when you were, doing your due diligence to see how you wanted to go about selling the practice?
Yeah, I looked at about 4 different DSOs at the time that were operating in the Chicago area. I won't go into any names in particular, but I'd say all the other DSOs were always more interested in how much money the practice was making, how much money I wanted to have out of it, how could they guarantee that they'd continue to do well successfully. So there was less about, quality of care and how's your staff working and that sort of thing. It was all about the business aspect of the practice, and they wanted to make sure they would make money.
Sure.
With Decision One, and I hate to keep talking about how great they were, but I felt like I was joining a family again. They just had a much more, I guess, patient-centered version of what they wanted, and I could identify with that. And most of the other DSOs, I'm sure, would be patient-centered had I gotten involved, but it was like secondary to the financial, and there just wasn't really anything I wanted to put me or my staff involved with, because I felt there'd be too many changes that way.
Sure. And I know their goal is like really being dentist led. So I'm sure that's part of it.
For sure.
What advice would you give to other dentists that are considering selling their practices to a DSO?
Well, I think the first decision that a dentist has to make before they would sell to a DSO is, what's their goal in their practice? Are they selling it at a stage in their practice where maybe they're in their 50s or something and they have a lot of years left, so they don't really want to retire, but they're looking for a different way to run the practice. Joining a big group like that in your age bracket, I think gives you a kind of a big network of dentists to work with. And that's a really nice thing with DSOs, because you have a network that you can respond to and work with. If you're right on the edge of retirement like I was, then it's just a matter of how are they going to work the transition for you? How much time will they give you to work out? That sort of thing. So, but the main and primary goal is, will your DSO support what you have in mind as a dentist? Because if your goals aren't being met as the new DSO takes over, then you're not going to be happy in that environment. And then you'll be very sad that you sold that. So make sure that your professional goals are the same as the DSO's goals.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, Dr. Palmer. And I really appreciate you joining me today and kind of going over this, because I think there's a lot of doctors and dentists they're in this situation where it's very difficult to sell to a new dentist who's coming out of school with so much debt that, it's very hard for them to even get into, getting into a practice.
Yeah, I think the DSOs really give an option for a lot of young dentists to be able to start their career. It's a great way to get going, get a lot of practice and a lot of experience. And it doesn't mean you have to stay with the DSO, but I think if you get with the right DSO, you may find that that's really where you want to be for the rest of your career, because it can be a great place to work.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm just so thankful that you were able to kind of give us a feel of what it's like to transition from private practice to a DSO.
Well,
So
it's really
thank
been
you.
my pleasure, Christine. Thank you very much for asking me to be a part of this.
Yes, thanks so much.
Okay, bye-bye.
I'd like to thank our sponsor, Twice as Nice Uniforms. Dressing for success, infection control, and comfort is crucial for the DSO team. Not only do they need to look great and feel great, but they need to be dressed for safety. Your patients will notice when your team is dressed appropriately, and your staff will perform better. Who better to help your team with these decisions than Twice as Nice Uniforms? Owned by a seasoned dental hygienist, branding expert, fit specialist, and fashion model, Twice as Nice Uniforms are designed to follow infection control and OSHA regulations, alleviate the thermostat wars in your office with temperature regulating technology, and provide long-lasting professional-looking scrubs, lab coats, and accessories. Custom uniform programs will take the burden of painstaking ordering, exchanges, and returns off your shoulders. It's proudly made in the USA. And Twice as Nice is giving our listeners a discount code TDH2024 to take advantage of this special offer. Thank you for listening to the DSO Hygienist Podcast. Please follow or subscribe to be alerted of new episodes.